It's never easy, I don't think, to allow people to come on to your place and see what's going on, but they've been gracious enough and they've been good hosts. They've done this before as well, and we're thankful for that. Someone told me earlier today that it's been a while since we've been up in Northeast Burley County, and you're right. And so we're very grateful to be up in this area, and it can bring back this style of tour, if you will, for drops, covers, and counts. I think at this time I'll just going to, you've got the information on some of the fields, and you're going to see we've got the cornfield behind you. We'll make our way across the road and have a short discussion or some discussion in the oats field, and then of course by the pea field, and you've got the information on that. We're going to let everyone take a crack at the mic, but first off, I'd like to introduce again Glenn Bauer, and Glenn's going to tell us a little bit about his journey and how what it's taken and his steps and his progressions through this. And along with that, Jay, then we'll do a little talk on the carbon side. And so we'll take it from there. And I encourage everyone, we'll try to get a mic to you, or do we have extra mics for questions, Chad and Seth, or not? Okay. So you'll just have to holler it out, or we can come with the mic. So North Dakota style, yes. Now let her rip, So with that, again, Glenn, from a personal note, Glenn was once my 4-H leader long ago. And of course, he was a board of supervisors. I believe came on right after I came on board in 99. So, and of course, Glenn has been a great resource for the soil district, him and his family and all that. And I just looking forward to what he's got to say here. So,
well, I'm not sure where to start, but my dad started with horses, and the rest I started farming. I started with a plow packer and pony drill, a 3-bottom outfit. Well, the next year I had a 4-bottom outfit. And as time went on, that's a slow way to put a crop in. And so since that, we started with no-till 25 years ago, and we were doing till about 18 years before that. And Jay kept telling me that, you guys are not doing no-till. We had a Concord, but we're one trip over, and so okay. And then I went to meeting at Fargo, and Beaver was, and listened to him, and we traded off our Concord for a no-till drill, and been with a no-till drill ever since. And we think it just gets better all the time. They hit 100% every year. Guys that are tilling the ground. So with that Jay.
Well, thanks, Glenn. Everyone in the back here, okay? If not, move forward. Lots of room here. Okay. So in the 80s, so I started here in 1985, and there was something occurring in the 80s. So those of you that were farming in the 80s, do you remember what was occurring on a way too frequent basis in our farming systems? What? Summer fellow, which created a lot of lot of erosion. So we had all kinds of erosion. And when you have clay particles in the air, you get enough of them, you're gonna be able to physically see it, and it's a big phosphorus transfer. All these things are ongoing. So how do you start to minimize that? And then also in the 80s, they built a lot of waterways. So we were putting waterways in because we had water erosion. All right. So what we didn't realize at the time was we weren't infiltrating our water. And so we had to work through that scenario. And, Glenn and the Bowers here have done just an excellent job. And so they started in with Concord, it already had stabilized a lot. And so what happened is when you went from the sweeps to the single disc, you started to get a little better soil structure. So our structure started to, well, it almost drove me out of business in terms of building waterways, which was a wonderful thing to happen. And so we were starting to put in fewer and fewer. It was just a reverse correlation. The erosion went down, infiltration went up. How novel. And so when you're looking at those type scenarios, then it's a matter of building through this. Now, another big part of it is diversity. So what crops did you see as you were driving along Highway 36 and driving along Regan? What'd you see? Sunflower?
Buckwheat.
All right, buckwheat. What else? Wheat, corn, soybean. So, yeah, so you basically have all the crop types. Season grass, warm season grass, season green leaf, warm season crop. All great different exudates in terms of building soil structure. Oh, somehow or other, Glenn, you were able to make those transitions, not just one, but you probably made about 3 or 4 in your lifetime. Yeah. And so that was the start of it.
Well, Jay mentioned summer fall. We were the first one not to do any summer following at all. Then, we heard neighbors talk about there's something wrong. But you don't see any summer fall around here at all. If somebody isn't producing a crop on it, they've got a cover crop. I think that was one of the biggest. Like, just a waste.
So what, we need that green plant to bring carbon into the soil. And when you have an idle year like that without a green plant, the refrigerator door's locked shut. There's no carbon coming into that soil to feed that biology. And so that was just another part of our learning process. Okay. So, Glenn, any last comments? Another topic? Talk a little bit about.
Yeah, plant pot.
Indeed.
That was what Bowers is their diverse crop.
Crop diversity.
We're in the part of the county where you're going to see more different crop types than, say, your normal corn and bean society that the women. But you want to elaborate a little bit on that, Glenn? You said, I think that's totally to what you guys, when you're not being. Well, we just think you can't. You got to raise more different crops on this ground than just one or two. You got to have more crops, and you got to keep. You can't put this. And these next lot of time we'll have to put on wheat or something like that. But we like to be as diverse as we can with our seeding as possible. That's what you're getting out there, Daryl, or but with yeah, well, like this sea salt that Steve is trying here. It's something new and different, but I think you're going to be trying something different all the time. We don't know how the Lance is he's the one that talked to us first about system. But Steve did quite a bit of research on it. So I think we got like a couple semi-loads of it. So they're he'll win on. And you've got what I think 2 different micronutrients in it, and all crops use different amounts of different nutrients. So not all crops use the same. That's about as you like your talk. So that's what it. Yeah. Good. Steve, anything you wanted to add? I'll probably just talk a bit about.
Oh, I guess on the carbon, before we go into the carbon cycle a little bit, what have you seen happen over time with soil organic matter levels? So have you seen any change?
We probably more than doubled the amount because we were down at 1.5% and 2.5%. We've got tests now that'll as high as 5%, and really it increased our carbon in our soil. And as a result, we're holding a lot of moisture in our soil that we get when we only have 2% in it. So
That's a major item right there. So it's a good segue for this next part of the talk. So, all right, yeah, appreciate it. So, Glenn and I have had the opportunity to work together many times. Glenn was past board member, as David is, his son is now, and so we have a long association. Appreciate that. So with that, we're going to just spin off a little bit. So there's, I don't know how it is in your world, but there's a lot of conversation on carbon. Am I right? Yes. And so there's a lot of background noise. There's just a lot of discussion on it. So just kind of set the stage for today's conversations. Just kind of want to do a little bit of a refresher. And you're welcome to move in closer so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. And a little bit closer. So we have a corn plant. So we're going to talk about where the carbon is. So Glenn said the soil organic matter increased over time. So why did that happen? So let's talk about that so we understand how this works. So on a corn plant, 1/3 of the carbon is in the grain. So where does that grain go? It's going to get wheels under it, right? It's going out of the field, okay? Because it's an extraction business, right? And so consequently, 1/3 of that carbon is in the grain, but it's going to be leaving. 1/3 of the carbon is in the above ground plant residue, okay? So if we leave that on the soil surface, we're going to get some, right? So we're going to get some of that. A lot of it's going to go CO2 to the atmosphere and start the recycling of the carbon cycle. So a lot of that, but 1/3 of it, if we take it as silage, that we lose 2/3, right? We lose the grain and we lose the above ground residue. All right. Now we got the root mass. So there's 1/3 of the carbon in the root mass. So if we leave it decay in place, we're going to capture a fair bit of that. We won't capture it all because it's part of the carbon cycle. So when you hear carbon, always think food. So when you hear carbon, think of food for the biology, principal food source, okay, biological. So now, those are the 3 parts of carbon for a corn plant. Don Rykowski, of course, retired soil scientist, of course, Minnesota, taught us all this, and he explained how this system works. But then there's a 4th part of carbon. So what's the 4th part of carbon that puts carbon, sugar oxidase into our soil? What is that? There's a 4th part. These are 3 parts, but there's 1 more. Anybody? Yeah, the decomp will occur on this. Yeah. The decomp will occur. But when we have a new plant, in the first 4 to 8 weeks of a new plant's life, it gives off exudates into the soil, sugars. That's carbon. Who consumes it? The microbes. What do they do with it? They're gonna complete all their life cycles. Well, one of the things they're gonna do is build soil aggregates. If you don't have a soil aggregate, you don't have a pore space. You don't have a pore space, you don't have much for infiltration. You can't get the water in the soil. Okay? Then you're a very unhappy camper, right? And so we used to run quite a bit of our water off. The interesting thing was, from early county farmers and ranchers that I evolved with over time, used to be we'd have a rain and we'd say, how much rain did you get? And they would tell you to the 100, 60 hundredths, 55 hundredths. Okay? Eventually, as we got better at this, and you had to rain, you say, how much rain did you get? The answer was, all of it. There's your difference. Huge difference, because if you have the pore spaces, you can infiltrate that water. You can store that water. Glenn talked about increasing carbon levels. He's got a bigger bucket to hold water. And that's one of the reasons why you see these crops look like they do. They look stellar. And so it starts to all come together. So you can always tell a corn plant, when it's in probably B6, B7 or less, you can always nip off the ends of the root tips and you can eat those. And what will they taste like? Don't say boot leather. They're going to have a sugar taste. They're going to taste like a sweet peas, or they're going to have that sugar taste. Well, that's when you could tell. So that's in the beginning stages of a new plant, right? Now, after a crop comes off and you put a cover crop in, you start that process over again. Now you're going to have the exudates again, okay? And so that's a lot different than a fallow system that didn't have anything, or a tillage system that didn't allow the residues to be on the soil surface. So a whole different ballgame. That type of thing is what we're evolving with. So what I wanted to show you too, when you build an aggregate, it takes a fibrous root. So a sunflower root, the radish root, the big tap roots, they don't typically build much for aggregates. They make macropores in the soil, a big highway up and down. But the fibrous root, they actually, oh, Glenn, you're going to have to do something with these worms here. I don't know. That soil looks pretty tough. So just kidding. So when you look at this, it's very friable. It just falls apart in your hand. Lots of pore spaces. So when you have lots of pore spaces, you have air and water moving through the system. It's very aerobic. You have the earthworms, of course, then you have the scenario where they build the macropores, and then collectively it starts to come together, that mammoth. So those are kind of the 4 parts of carbon, and I encourage you to come up and just see for yourself how friable that soil is. And that's and a great smell as well. So that's a great start. And so with that, we might just pass this around a little bit. Steve, you start. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. This is my 5th time to North Dakota, and I never experienced rain before. So it does rain here. That's good to know.
Good.
But so, as was introduced this morning, I'm from southeastern Pennsylvania. Very different climate. 42 inches of rain. Annual preset, which comes sometimes, as Blake would know, it causes problems. Too much rain sometimes. I know you're on the dry side here, but we just all learn to deal with it. And I'll just really briefly say, we all have a story. We all have our journey. So regardless of where you're at on that today, I hope that this takes you one step forward. I started no-till in 1982 for one reason, and that was because I was tired of the ditches that I had to fill my 17% slopes after heavy rains. Didn't ever hear the concept of soil health in 1982. It wasn't a term we used. So I did it for that reason. I started seeing in my soil differences like 3 years later. I didn't know that, I was going to have more earthworms. I didn't know that I wouldn't have to till anymore. I didn't know that. Started using more cover crops later on. Started looking at diversity, And now we have, regenerative agriculture is the term we use for a lot of the stuff we're doing here. But where I want to take us a little bit today, and some of our thoughts, jumping off what Jay has shared with us here, is what's the next frontier? What is the next thing you need to be talking about? And I think it is the quality of our food, the nutritional density of our food or feed, regardless of where this stuff ends up here, if it goes to an animal or if it goes for human consumption. We need to have this discussion, because you know what? Everything we're doing here leads up to that. You cannot have a high nutrient dense food or feed product without doing all this stuff. I never dreamed 1982 when I started no-till that I would end up now. I'm doing cancer research with Penn State College of Medicine on the way we grow things, and we're seeing a difference. Can we cure cancer? Can we help to cure disease, chronic diseases, with the way we're growing our crops? So that's where I see this all going. And hopefully we can get paid for that. Because right now we don't get paid for quality. We just get paid for yield. There's no incentive to do some of these things. So that's, again, my hope, my goal. That's where I'm working with. And I would, just say, we have Deanna and Kelly here. If you don't know about their IMOS system, check that out. I'm using it. I think it's working in my farm in Pennsylvania. It can work here, where we're actually, looking at the indigenous microorganisms that you have in your farm and taking them back out to the fields. And it was interesting coming up here. I saw a windmill down the road here. I said, it's red beaver. I said, I'm assuming that was an old farmstead. Yes, it was. And it's unfortunate that things are the way they are. Agriculture. I don't know how many was in your little town of Regan down there, 35 now. I'm assuming it was a lot more years back. It's sad, but I think with the new agriculture paradigm, we can maybe bring back some of that, probably not all of it. But we need to get paid for the quality that we grow. I don't have the answers for all that. But I would just say there's a good foundation with what the Bowers are doing. One thing I noticed here, there's a whole bunch of barn swallows come over before. Looking at beyond the field is something we need to do. I've been paying attention to that. What's the butterfly counts, bird counts? Do you hear birds singing? All that stuff I never thought about before. But that's a part of the ecology that we need to be mindful of to get where we want to go. Because there is a way that nature was designed to function. We need to look at that, and we basically screwed it up. We've outsmarted ourselves as human beings in the last 100 years. And I don't blame my grandpa for plowing up and down the fields like he did on my farm now, because he did what he thought was right design. But now we are responsible. You guys were leaders in summer, not doing summer fallow. Look, that's changed the area. You all have those opportunities. Sometimes, you only say so much. Sometimes actions do speak louder than the word. So that's just my challenge here today, and our thoughts and so forth. So I'm looking forward to learning as well.
Steve, I have a question. You may want to elaborate, because you are the cover crop guy, right?
Go ahead.
If you look at some of their crop history and how they planted these fields, Steve, you'll notice that this corn behind us was planted green into growing rye. You want to talk a little bit about how that all plays out? And of course, then they terminated it. I get a lot of questions: when to terminate? Should you terminate it before, after? If you could elaborate on it.
That's a great question, because in my world, we like growing green cover crops to dry out the soil. That's the main reason that's really taken off, for us to help dry the soil out. Typically doesn't happen here. Welcome to 2023. We had the driest May on record. And so a lot of our farmers, they hadn't dealt with this issue before, because planting green is very popular in our area. We're 70% no-till and about 70% cover crops in our area with all the farms. And planting green 20% maybe is planted green, which is a high number. But we do it to dry out the soil. This year, there's been a few guys that got burnt a little bit, I'll say, because the cover crop dried out the soil, and that's the problem, right? The biggest problem, especially early on in the soil health. Once you have higher quality soil, that's not accurate as much. So the rules of the game change the longer it's being played. And you have to understand that, what your fields and your farm can do. So fortunately for us then, the second week of June, we started getting rain. So some of those fields that looked a little rough, that looked like pineapple fields, you know, those corpses tall, they came back, they looked really nice. I was telling some people who were calling me, said, what are we going to do? You know, my corn looks terrible, we're going to planting green. Just wait. Well, fortunately it got rain. And I also say, think of these practices in the context of a 10-year plan. There is potentially a time where you'll get burnt from doing some of this. We got to acknowledge that. But in the context of a 10-year plan, even if you still added to your soil health quality, even if you may not be always getting a better yield by doing this. And I think always we got to keep the big picture in mind, just like we do with the cash crops. You have a bad year, corn or wheat or whatever, you'll say, well, I'm never growing that again. Sometimes we say the same thing about cover crops. So I know for you guys, you know, when you terminate it is critical in looking at moisture, looking at the long-term forecast and everything. But I'm assuming in here this was terminated fairly young. Or like, how tall was it?
And I think the corn was planted.
Right, yeah. But how tall was the rye? Was the cereal rye, I think?
Yeah, cereal rye was probably 8
inches, yeah. So I just glanced in there a little bit. I saw that, and it's gone now because it's plenty of moisture in this. The bugs have eaten it up. So this is something that you're going to have to figure out, North Dakota. I can't give you those answers. We like to let it grow longer. We have a little, you know, longer growing season. The other thing too is I wonder is how do you work with the nitrogen management in that, because that's going to take up some available nitrogen at that point. Now it gave it back to you, or giving it back right now, so you can count that it's not much. And it takes time to build up the soil, but that's something I'm just going to have to say, go, you guys are going to work at that, figure it out, and see how that rolls. I don't know if there's an opportunity to grow a lagoon, what your seeding window is in the fall to get a lagoon that can actually survive. I'm not sure. You guys would know. So that would help offset some of the nitrogen penalty you might get doing that. Maybe I should pass this to Blake. Yes.
I was curious, since you planted the rye in a mix, how dense was the rye in the spring?
We had still planted it at about 90 pounds. So at this, there was mostly gone. Just without it.
Okay.
So he said, for his benefit, they planted the rye at 90 pounds. So he said there's still planting areas. Is that correct? With synopsis? Yep. So Pastor Groff, thanks for that introduction. It was wonderful. So I'm gonna start this, and I want people to finish. So in the Bible it says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's what? Neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife." When I look at this soil, sorry to tease Steve. When I look at this soil, I right away say, "Thou shalt not covet thy North Dakotan soil." And I say the same thing when I travel to Iowa. Yeah. So our soil type at home, where I live in southwestern Ontario, ladies and gentlemen, I come about an hour east of Detroit, Michigan, the home of rock and roll, the home of Henry Ford, the Motor City, however you want to refer to it as. And straight across Lake Erie would be Cleveland, Ohio from home. And our soil type was originally glacial lake bottom, Brookston clay. It's classified as imperfectly drained. And the color and texture of our soil is very, it's more of a brown than it is black. And it was originally covered by Carolinian hardwood forest, right? So the beauty of having a topography like this, that years ago was primarily dominated by grass, right? The grass grows, the grass dies. So it has that root, right? Living and dying plant. And the roots, like Jay talked about, provided that nice carbon deposition. where mine is leaf litter and then heavy lignin, right? That bark, that tree, that wood. So we don't have that same black type soil. So I talk about soils when I talk about soils and I'm a farmer. I'm not, anything special. I'm just like a lot of you in the crowd today. I derive my livelihood from farming exclusively. And I talk about soils being offensive or defensive. So an offensive soil can grow pretty much anything imaginable on the planet, provided that you have the right temperature and the right amount of precipitation. Okay? And so obviously when we talk about the diversity out here, these soils right away, I would describe as being offensive. The limitation being at times we're limited on precip. And then we have a thing called winter, right, too? Just like I have winter at home in Canada. Where I live geographically, I'd be truthfully a little bit south of where we are today. I'm about at the 42nd parallel. But I like everything we're talking about carbon. And the one thing about carbon, right? Carbon holds 7 times its weight in water. So in a limited precipitation environment, you can essentially, by increasing carbon, we can start to drought fertile soils. So that's where I think is the big ingredient. I was in Chile, and I've shared this story many times when I spoke around the world, visiting with Carlos Provetto, and he would be considered a no-till pioneer. And Carlos would say this thick Scotty Spanish accent. He would say, "Friend, let me tell you something." He would say, "Carbon is food, the food for the soil." And that's what it's all about. It's that carbon, right? It's that sugar. It's those root exudates that Jay talked about, driving that down there to feed the biology. And I love your analogy too, Jay. It's about when you keep the fridge door closed, right? We shut off that carbon. We're not feeding the soil organisms. And so tragically, so many of us for years have been taught that soil is an inert substance, right? We have a real hard time understanding that soil is indeed a collection of living, breathing organisms. And so that's why I always love to use the senses. When I engage soil, when I go to people's farms like Rick Beaver yesterday, I love the fact that, Rick's like sticking his soil right in my face, right? Like, and like indeed, like I always say to people, man, if you smell the soil, oh yeah, we could bottle that up and I could sell that for big money, right? That smell, that bouquet, right? That fragrance, right? That's what I love. And that's straight away, we need to re-engage our senses. We need to re-engage that youthful curiosity. That's what I love to see these younger people here. Young men, take a look at me. What's your name, young fella? Don't be shy. What's your name? Bruce? Steve? Wayne? Anyways, thanks for coming. Because this is the future of the industry, right? These are the people we need to remind ourselves we got to get back to thinking like this young person here. Not being afraid to challenge the status quo. Continually feed our brain, because if we don't, it dies. So thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be part of the day, and I'll hand the mic back over to you, Jake.
I think probably the Lance girls or
Yeah. So I mentioned to Lance this morning, we lost Kenny Miller, but we adopted Lance. So he's our new adopted Kenny Miller racer for us. And so with that, don't disappoint us. Don't let us down. Don't let us down.
Maybe look at your shoes a lot.
Yeah, look at that. Kenny Miller would give the entire talk to his shoes. So that's a great comment.
Okay, thanks, Lincoln. Glad to be part of the family. As Steve mentioned, it's all, everybody has a story, and where I'm at with grazing now, it all started with no-till. It was a work relationship thing. We couldn't get our work done. Dad had a heart attack. We busted our butts for 3 years doing conventional agriculture, trying to get caught up. And I went to a Super Bowl party, most expensive party I've ever been to. Gentleman there was a John Deere salesman, machinery salesman, and he said, I couldn't go. If I ever go back into farming, I'd buy myself a 750 no-till drill, and it made so much sense to me. 3 weeks later, I owned the no-till drill, didn't know a thing about it. So thankfully Burley County was having all these workshops, because that's where, and that's where it all snowballed from there, with soil health. It's like, okay, we got to think soil health. I started it for labor purposes, but it quickly transitioned into soil health and quality of food, quality of soil. And then that started transitioning to, well, why can't we do this on our grazing? Why can't we do this on with our cattle? And then also, you know, my own personal health collapsing at one point in time here is like, okay, we got to look at what we're raising with our plants, and we got to start with healthy soils. It's got to start with healthy soils. And what more can we do to turn everything over? You know, when do you start? As soon as possible. Would have been last year or yesterday would have been better, but here we are today, where we're at today. Take the next step, try something new. It's great that you're here to see this 21 years of no-till and 18 years of Concord before that. So yeah, I mean, just look at what this can do. It's never too late to start, and we got a great group of guys here that know a lot more than I do about no-till, so I'll turn it over to Daryl or Jay or whoever needs it next.
Thank you, all you gentlemen, for kicking it off here. I guess at this point in time, I'd ask, does anyone want to have a discussion on the corn, or do you have questions or comments? Roger, I'd
like to ask Glenn, when you took these trials out, are you still incorporating glyphosate, or what are you doing there? It's the back.
The question is about your herbicide treatment. Are you using glyphosate, Roundup?
To take the rye out of there.
You gotta talk
Steve, Steve.
All I do anymore is just run a vehicle.
Finally come clean after all. So Steve doesn't like to talk, so Steve will whisper it to me and then I'll tell you. I had this discussion with him the other day in Glenn's kitchen. This is a conventional corn, though, as you can see from the
Roundup ready.
It's conventional, right? It's conventional corn, and so we can have that whole discussion, I guess.
In it.
So go ahead, Davis.
As you can see, we've our swathing this year, you know, with this oats, we're afraid it's going to get too far along. So rather than spray it with a glyphosate or something like that, we'd rather swath it than spray it on the fruit that you're trying to sell. One thing that I guess I haven't told anybody, but my brother and I came out on my brother and I came out, we got a refractometer.
Yeah.
And we came out and we tested the pea field on one side here and the oats field on the other side here. And I don't know exactly when that was. The pea field, and whenever you think about it, the peas are sweet, sort of a crop. And the field was at 7, but the oats field was at 10 for the refractometer, which surprised us, and I don't know why that would be, but one thing we discussed at one meeting was that grasshoppers, if they have the bricks up over 10, it kills the grasshoppers as soon as they start to eat it. So they don't have a complex enough digestive system. So you see a lot of people this year with a lot of grasshopper problems, and you do see grasshoppers. But if we can get inner soils healthy enough that we can get that bricks high enough, it will really negate a lot of our insect problems. And that was one thing it brings here.
Jay, could you just elaborate quick on bricks that played to the group quickly?
Sorry.
You're very good at.
So it's so when the sun comes up and the photosynthetic rate starts on a plant, okay, it doesn't ramp up immediately. So the sun comes up and it's down at full ramp. Okay, so it takes a little while for that to happen. And usually, if you do bricks at 7 o'clock in the morning and you do it again at 11, you're going to have high sugar content or noonish. So when you talk about people moving cattle, sometimes they like to move them around, dude, because when they come in to graze, you're going to have a higher sugar content in that plant. And so it's kind of a measure, if you will. So if you run out the table, there's a bricks, poor, fair, good, excellent for every crop, numerically. And so it's a guide you can take a look at, but it's really, it's based on the photosynthetic rate. As the sun comes up and the stomata opens, you would think the sun came up, that plant is fully functioning, but no, takes it a little while, likes to have a cup of coffee or two like me, and then, eventually you're there. So, but it's the start, so it'd be more nutrient dense at the somewhere maybe between 11 and 1 many times we see. Depends on the clouds, depends on the temperature, depends on all these things, but it's an indicator.
It's a great thing that's a great tool. A refractometer is what measures bricks. It's very simple. You can buy it off Amazon. And it's just a good tool to have to understand, because it can to help determine where you're at. What is your benchmark? There can be some difference in varieties sometimes, but it's really an indicator of your soil's health. And yes, there is an insect repellent. See, a lot of insects don't have a pancreas, so they can't, it causes sugars. So you have a high sugar, they'll just like, nope, I don't like that. So there's a theory out there that insects and disease are like turkey vultures. I'll give make turkey vultures around here, a lot in Pennsylvania. And it's the cleanup. A turkey vulture will never attack the healthy animal. Just gets the weak ones. And is that how our nature is designed to function with disease? It cleans up the weak plants. But the quality of our plants is so low these days that's why we need all these inputs to be able to do it. So I don't have this all figured out yet, but from a biological standpoint, it is the biology that's going to help to build a plant, to grow a plant that is more resistant to insects and diseases. I think it can happen. I'm still working on that in my own barn. I'll just say that we've all been eliminated insecticides on everything I grow, and all but eliminated fungicides on everything I grow. I still have some gaps to close, trying to figure it out. But I tell you, it is real. It is real. Especially, we have a lot of pumpkins growing in our area. People cannot believe I can grow pumpkins without insecticides. But it's there, and it's free. So I've experienced some of this. I still have a little ways to go on fungicide parts, but I'll make one other comment circling back to the glyphosate gears. I think we all agree that it's been way overused. I'm certainly not trying to fan it, but there are products in the pipeline to replace glyphosate. The one I'm familiar with is called Harp Bio. You can look it up. Harp Bio, HARPE Bio. I was able to test it last year. It's like a weak version of Gramoxone. If you used to rock Gramoxone, it's a friend. And it's based on mint and menthol. You could smell that for 3 days after we applied it, and it smelled good. How would that be to have a herbicide that smells good? So I don't think it's going to be quite as strong as some of the stuff we're used to, but it's pretty natural. I think if we can use that as a tool, not going to come out to 2025 probably the way last I heard, so we'll see.
More questions from the group? Comments? Yes, in the back.
On the bricks difference between the oats and the peas, could it potentially be that through fertilization and the development of varieties, we've lost a lot of our root exudates, like in our peas or corn, versus oats hasn't gone through that, so it actually has a higher root exudate content. So therefore you have more sugars, higher soil health. Could that have something to do with the higher bricks content?
Before you guys, let's add that.
It's too early in the morning for people. Each crop have their own. Each crop has its own warfare, good, excellent. And so you can look at pea and then you can look at oat to put it in relation to each other, if you will. Okay. But I also would agree, we've done plant breeding for the years. It's so wheat, corn, soybean, especially. I don't know if there's been enough money in the oat crop for investment. So we probably got a pretty good functioning plant.
in that regard. But I think you have to look at their each individual plants. Numerical rating really got to do that full comparison. So, yeah, but 10, I'd take 10. I'd be pretty happy with that.
Brought up a great question about varieties. All the varieties we have available to us now have been bred and chosen and selected in a high input environment. And it's kind of like, when no-till first came out, like, how can I adapt my current conservation tillage plant or whatever, just put a collar on it and make it a no-till collar, no-till planter. Well, now, our planters are built for no-till from the ground up. We're still using archaic genetics in the context of regenerative agriculture. There's hardly anybody breeding corn, wheat, or anything you see here in good, healthy soils. And I know for a fact that some of the older varieties have a deeper root, like in oats and small grains particularly. I've seen it, and that tells us a lot, because the newer stuff's been bred, didn't need roots, because you're putting on 100 pounds of nitrogen. So the whole thing is associated with everything we're talking about here today. And I'm not saying we go back and just use old varieties, but we need to be testing. We need to have breeders. There's a few of them out there now, and the people doing this, to grow our varieties in a regenerative situation so we can then get some of these benefits too. So that's another weak link currently that we're struggling with. Everybody in the audience is familiar with Norman Borlaug, right? The man who was referred to as the father of the Green Revolution. So, rightly or wrongly, I found myself at Summit as part of my uphill journey. So Summit is part of Norman's vision, right, to create hybrids of corn and varieties of wheat for the impoverished nations of the world. So those nations that weren't able to have the financial resources to look after those people living there in those countries. And at Summit, you stand there, the vision of the pioneers, the early adopters, were to harness water coming out of the mountains for an extensive irrigation area. And so where you had water, you had a crop, and where you had no water, you had no crop. But through the discussion with the wheat researchers, they talked about the 1-to-1 ratio of straw length in the wheat varieties versus the root length in the same variety. So here at home, where we grow winter wheat in our rotation, the breeders, because the farmers keep struggling to deal with wheat residue. They think it's a nuisance. They want to grow the grain. They don't want to be bothered with the straw because there's no animal influence anymore. A lot of those industries, aside from the mushroom industry that uses a lot of straw to make compost, disappeared. So the straw becomes a nuisance, right? So they've continually shortened up the wheat wanting the straw. And I asked the question, well, are we at the same time, knowing what the researchers say at Summit, are we shortening up that root length? And so I asked the question to this audience, how many here grow corn? Don't get afraid, come on. How many people grow corn in this audience? So anybody familiar with this new motivation to shorten up hybrids, right? And so if we start shortening up hybrids, what are we going to do to root length? I think we're going to shorten it. And I can guarantee you with 100% certainty that nobody is doing research as it pertains to the plant root structure. Primarily, hybrids are advanced for one reason and one reason only: yield, right? And so like Steve echoed there, I've asked breeders, I've asked researchers to come to my farm and try and grow hybrids in my environment using no-till cover crops, planting green, things like this, because where I've struggled is to find hybrids that perform satisfactorily in that environment with that management technique. And yet it continues to fall on deaf ears, right? Because what we do, the collective, and I realize I'm preaching to the choir, and I have to sort of throw Steve under the bus too as a preacher. But I realize that a lot of the people in the audience are somewhat on the converted side of the conversation already. And as we try to adopt these technologies, these techniques, whether they're reduction of herbicides or fungicides or whatever, we're seen as the disruptors, right? We're the fly in the ointment. And but I think we got to come back to understanding biology, and that's why I'm happy to be here today to share things that I'm also passionate about. So thank you.